Before you finish watching this video, you are going to believe one of two things about yourself. Either you are one of the rare people who would have refused, or you are not. In 1961, a psychologist at Yale University designed an experiment to find out what ordinary people would do when an authority figure told them to cause serious harm to another human being. He expected most people to refuse. He was wrong. What he discovered instead shattered one of the most comforting beliefs that human beings hold about themselves, that when it truly matters, they will do the right thing. His name was Stanley Milgram. He was 28 years old when he designed the experiment. He had studied under Solomon Asch, who had already shown that people would deny the evidence of their own eyes under social pressure. But Milgram wanted to go further. His original question was this: how did ordinary German citizens, teachers, accountants, shopkeepers, fathers, participate in the Holocaust? Not the SS officers. Not the camp commanders. The bureaucrats. The administrators. The people who simply did their jobs. The year was 1961. Adolf Eichmann was on trial in Jerusalem for organizing the deportation of millions of Jews to extermination camps. Hannah Arendt was covering the trial for The New Yorker. What she saw in that courtroom disturbed her more than she had expected. Eichmann was not a monster. He was a bureaucrat. He spoke in cliches. He insisted he had never personally harmed anyone. He had simply followed orders and done his job efficiently. Arendt called it the banality of evil. Milgram called it a research question. The setup was simple and deliberately deceptive. Participants were recruited through newspaper ads for a study on learning and memory at Yale University. They were paid $4 for showing up, regardless of what happened. When they arrived, they were introduced to another participant. In reality, this other person was an actor, a confederate of the experiment. A rigged draw ensured the real participant always became the teacher and the actor always became the learner. The learner was taken to an adjacent room and, visibly, in front of the teacher, strapped to a chair with electrodes attached to his arm. The teacher sat in front of an imposing machine, a shock generator with 30 switches, ranging from 15 volts to 450 volts. The switches were labeled slight shock, moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, danger, severe shock. The last two switches were simply marked XXX. The task was to test the learner on word pairs. Every wrong answer received a shock, and the voltage increased with every mistake. At 75 volts, the learner grunted. At 120 volts, he shouted that the shocks were becoming painful. At 150 volts, he demanded to be released from the experiment. At 270 volts, he screamed. At 300 volts, he said he would no longer provide answers. At 330 volts, there was only silence. When participants hesitated or tried to stop, the experimenter, in a gray lab coat, delivered one of 4 scripted responses. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice, you must go on. Milgram predicted that about 1 to 3% of participants would administer the maximum shock. The actual result, 65%. 2 out of 3 ordinary people, teachers, engineers, postal workers, people with families and values and beliefs about right and wrong, administered what they believed was a lethal electric shock to another human being. Bika. Someone in a lab coat told them the experiment required it. Milgram spent years trying to understand why. What he proposed was this: human beings operate in 2 fundamentally different psychological states. In the first state, the autonomous state, you act according to your own values, your own judgment, your own sense of responsibility. When you are in this state, you feel like the author of your actions. In the second state, the agentic state, you see yourself as the instrument of someone else's will. You are no longer the author. You are the executor. And in this state, something critical shifts, the sense of moral responsibility moves from you to the authority figure who gave the order. This is not cowardice. It is not stupidity. It is a deep feature of human social organization. For thousands of years, the ability to coordinate large groups of people required individuals to subordinate their personal judgment to a chain of command. Armies, institutions, organizations, they all function because people can enter the agentic state and follow directions without debating every order. The problem is that this same capacity makes ordinary people capable of participating in atrocities. And Milgram identified the three conditions that reliably induce the agentic state. First, a perceived legitimate authority. Not just any authority, one that carries institutional weight. A uniform, a title, a lab coat, a corner office. Second, gradual escalation. The switches in Milgram's machine started at 15 volts. By the time participants were pressing 300, 400, 450, they had already pressed 20 switches. Each small step had been taken. Stopping now would mean admitting that all the previous steps had been wrong. Third, diffusion of responsibility. The experimenter said the experiment requires it. The teacher was not being asked to hurt someone. They were being asked to follow a protocol. Someone else was responsible for the outcome. In 2003, photographs emerged from Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. American soldiers, men and women who had families, who went to church, who coached Little League, were shown humiliating, torturing, and abusing Iraqi detainees. The initial response was predictable: these were bad people. Aberrations. The result of a few rotten apples in an otherwise clean barrel. Philip Zimbardo, the psychologist who had run the Stanford prison experiment in 1971, in which ordinary students became brutal guards within days, looked at those photographs and saw something different. He saw the barrel. Zimbardo testified in the defense of one of the soldiers at Abu Ghraib. His argument was not that the soldier was innocent. His argument was that the system had produced the behavior. The same forces Milgram had identified in a Yale laboratory: legitimate authority, gradual escalation, diffusion of responsibility. Institutional context had been operating in that prison. And when investigators looked at Enron, at Volkswagen's emissions fraud, at Wells Fargo's fake account scandal, they found the same pattern. Mid-level employees who knew, who continued, who told themselves they were just doing their jobs. "Everyone above me knew" was the most common sentence in the post-collapse interviews. The Milgram experiment had not described a historical anomaly. It had described the operating system of every human institution. Here is the part of this story that most people refuse to sit with. When Milgram's participants were told what the experiment had actually been about, when they learned that the screaming had been recorded and the shocks were not real, many of them experienced something unexpected. Not relief. Not outrage at being deceived. Shame. Because they had done it. They had pressed the switches. They had heard the screaming. They had told themselves it was not their responsibility. And now they knew what that said about them. Jerry Berger replicated the experiment in 2009, 45 years later, stopping at the 150-volt threshold for ethical reasons. The percentage who continued, virtually identical to Milgram's original results. Obedience to authority had not changed in 4.5 decades. And the most disturbing finding of all was not the 65%. It was what happened in the variations. When the experimenter gave instructions by phone instead of in person, obedience dropped to 20%. When two experimenters disagreed in front of the participant, obedience dropped to near zero. When the participant could see two peers refuse, obedience dropped dramatically. In other words, the system is not inevitable. It requires very specific conditions to function. The authority must be present. The dissent must be absent. The escalation must be gradual. Change any one of those conditions, and the mechanism fails. Milgram asked his participants, after the debrief, a question that has stayed with me since I first read it. If you were ordered to do it again, would you? Most said no. But that was after they knew. After the debrief. After the shame. Before the experiment, every single one of them would have told you they would never do such a thing. That is the lesson. The question is not would I follow a clearly evil order? Nobody follows clearly evil orders. The orders are never framed that way. They are framed as protocol, as procedure, as what the experiment requires, as what the company needs, as what the situation demands. The mechanism does not announce itself. So the real question, the only question that matters, is not what you would do in a scenario you can identify as wrong. It is what you are doing right now, in the scenarios you have not yet identified. In the meetings you attend. In the instructions you follow. In the things you do not say because no one else is saying them. Milgram's switches started at 15 volts. They always start at 15 volts.